Okay, so now that we've bounced out our audio track for the music, we can now mix everything together. You want to do this in a separate session so that you have just a music output that's already been rendered out, and you can merely just set volume envelopes on that music to render it in with your background sounds. Now, if you're really going to be involved with the music, you could bounce out what are called stems. Those are just waveforms or wave files of the individual sections of your composition. So you might have a stem for strings only. You might have a stem for the synthesizers only, or you might have a stem for the piano stuff or just the percussion line or something like that. And what you can do with these is you can mix those stems together and leave out certain stems that might get in the way of certain things that are going on in the scene. There might be a time when the dialogue is being interrupted. It's in the same kind of register as some of the string music. So if you have that string stem there, you could mix out the string stem, leave everything else, and it would continue on as if the music was written that way. We're not going to be that involved. We rendered it out as one thing, and there's not very much going on in the background. So let's just mix these two things together. Now, there's two different ways to do it. You can do it the way we're going to do it here, which is sort of blind. I know that the music already syncs up with the video because it was rendered that way. It was recorded that way in Qtractor. I also know that if I just put these two tracks together, the background track from the video for the effects, the sound effects, and the music together, that they will line up perfectly. I don't really need to sync anything. Because of that, I know that I don't need to see the video. Also, it's pretty straightforward. The music was written around the sound effects, and the sound effects were not included in places where I know the music needs to take over, and I was aware of that because I made all of it. So I'm not going to need to do a lot of tweaking here. I just need to mix these two together in the most efficient way. So I'm going to do it here in Audacity. Now, if you want to get particular, you should probably open up another Qtractor session with video sync through a video player like we did with the music, and then mix the waveforms that way using volume envelopes, and then you output your final track and then do mastering on that separate. We're going to do all the mixing and mastering right in here. So let's go get our files that we have. I have the original sound effects track, and then I also have the mixed down music. And you'll see right away that these levels don't really line up. Now, I have a few kind of big spikes, some clips here on my background sounds. So I'm going to deal with that first. I'm going to select my background sounds, and I'll mute my music. I'll deal with this one first. And on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a limiter effect, and I'm going to put a hard limit on this. I don't want it to make up the gain. I just want it to clip down on some of those high sounds there. Okay. Then the next thing I want to do is, if you listen to this track, you'll hear the hiss of the background come in and stop when the different effects occur, and it's not always the same. So I want to try to get some of that back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another track, just a mono track, and I will move this track up so it's right underneath. And then in the mono track, I'm going to generate some noise. And I want this to be, we'll say 2 minutes, 30 seconds is fine, white noise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unsolo that, mute this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my noise, which is extremely loud. If I hit this right now, it would blow your ears off. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to normalize it down quite a bit. We'll say negative 15. And that makes it quite a bit smaller. It's still pretty loud. You can hear there, so there's quite a bit of a loud noise there. Then I'm just going to take the volume and turn it way down here, put it down so it's almost barely perceivable. So I can hear that. If I turn it off, I know it's missing. And what that does is it just helps to mask and kind of mix all these things together pretty well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut. Let me trim this here so it's the same length. And I'll go over here to Edit, Clip Boundary Split, get rid of that part on the end. And I'm going to mix these two together. So I'll grab these two items, so our background sounds in the white noise, and I'm going to go to Tracks, and I'm going to hit Mix, Mix and Render to New Track. And that should give me a new track below. I'll get rid of the originals. That now has the white noise in it as well as my sound effects in the background. And now if I play this back, I can hear a little bit of my white noise in there. I can see what my decibel readout is. So that's perfectly adequate right there. If I really want to get picky, I could try to take this down a little bit more by selecting some blank space, and then I could apply a noise reduction, and that will take out some of the frequencies and blend together a little bit more. Get rid of some of that white noise, but keep it kind of so that it gradually comes in whenever these other sounds happen. Make it a little bit more silent. But I think this is fine. We're going to leave it just the way it is. Now let's check on the music here. So I will unmute the music track, and I will mute the background track. This is not big enough to fill out our space here, our bandwidth. So what we're going to do is we're going to master this, the music alone, just a little bit. Mastering in general is two things. Now, there's a lot of filters that you can put on when you master sound. Ultimately, in my opinion, I think you ought to mix the music from the mixing standpoint, the mixing function, such that it sounds good. It sounds as good as you want it in the mix. That way, when you get to mastering, you're not doing a lot of different tweaks and edits to your project. So you want to apply the EQ track by track the way you would want it to be in the mix, so that your final mix is already extremely close to the mastered sound. And really, in the end, all you should be dealing with is maybe a little bit of EQ and compression. So some EQ and compression to get these waveforms to balance out a little bit more. So that's all we're going to do. Now if we listen, I find that when I mix, usually the output from the mix is a little bit dull, and it doesn't have quite the shimmer or brightness that I want, and that's pretty true of most mixes. So we're just going to apply quickly an EQ boost to the high frequencies, and then on top of that we will do a little bit of compression. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to, at least I'm going to select everything in the audio track. I'm going to go to Effect, Normalize, -6. This will give us some room to work. And we're already very close to that. And then I'm going to apply an equalization. So we'll go to equalization. I actually just use this. If I flatten it, the one I'm using is a preset. It's good enough for what we're doing. It's a treble boost. So it's just boosting up the higher frequencies up here. I'm pretty content with the low frequencies in the mix the way I made it, but I just want to bring up some of the higher frequencies to give it a little bit more shine and brightness to it. And we'll hit OK. And that will boost those frequencies ever so slightly. And if we listen again, it's a little bit brighter sound to it. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to apply some compression. But before I do that, I'm going to normalize this. And I'm going to normalize to -0.1, so it's not at 0. And then still with it selected, I'm going to go to the compressor, and I'm just going to use a default setting. I'm not going to change it at all. I'm just going to take the default settings there for compression and hit OK. And that should bring back quite a bit of loudness. And one more time, I might just to make sure nothing peaked, in that it shouldn't have, I will do one more time with our normalization and make sure nothing is clipping. So now here's our sound. So it's a lot brighter than the original mix, and it's a lot louder because it's been compressed. And that really is mastering. I mean, that's what mastering does. It just gives you one final EQ and some compression so that everything fills out and fills up the space as wide as it can be. I know there's more things you can do, but honestly, again, if your mix is right, if you've taken time in your mix to mix properly to the end result, then in mastering you really should only be dealing with these one or two elements to get the final sound. Now that I have that mastered, we'll turn on the background track, and we're just going to listen to it and make sure that nothing clips, because now we're adding waveforms together. And I think this should be fine. We might need to do a little bit of enveloping, but I think just the way this was constructed, it should work out well. So let's take a listen. That's good. So we can still hear the water from the shower as the music comes in, and the music isn't buried by it, but we can still hear the water. We can still hear these background moments occur when there's the burners. They're showing up in the music. Yeah, it's good. We'll jump ahead here. Windshield wipers. And we haven't clipped. Okay, so we know that we're all set. So one more thing, you could either export all of this right now, or what you could do, just to get one more check here, we're going to select both and mix down to a new track, and we'll delete the originals. So this is our final, and just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go to Effect and hit Normalize one more time, and that will make sure that nothing's clipping. There's a little bit of something big going on there. I'm not sure what it is. Let's see. Okay, so that's just this taking a step there, or opening the door. So I think that's fine. Okay, so that's our final track, and then we would export this to another file that we would then bring back into Blender in a moment to mix together with our final video. So that is mixing and mastering here in a nutshell, sort of the blind method using Audacity. Again, you could do very much the same thing using volume envelopes and get very complicated in another Q Tractor session, but I didn't think it was necessary in this. Now, what you would do, though, is that in your Q Tractor session, what you would probably want to do is do a mastering of your audio, your music, in Audacity first, and bring your mastered music back into that session, because you do need to master the music before you mix it with the sounds from the background track. So you would want to step out, do your mastering here for your music, export that, bring that wave back into Q Tractor, and then mix that in with everything else, checking your levels. And then normalize the final output of that to put into your movie. So let's take a look at how this looks to bring it back in to the picture and to bring it all together one more time in the video sequence editor in Blender.